Get out the insurance cards, get out the co-pays. The office is open, my friends, as this video is brought to you by drroto.com.
And welcome into the Pros with Joe's podcast. This is our first episode, and we're super excited to have you come along for the ride with us. I'll be your host tonight. My name is John Dansby, and riding alongside me is my friend and the co-founder of the Pros with Joe Charity League, Eric Romoff. Eric, glad to be here. Excited to join and watch this play out.
Yeah, it's going to be a ton of fun tonight. And I'm really excited to get the podcast kicked off with the Charity League. We are in our second season, and we really hope to get a podcast going in year one, but it was a little too much to take on. So super pumped to get this off the ground here in year two in 2021. And for all of you out there who are listening and have no clue what Pros with Joe's is, we are a charity fantasy football league where we pair off industry experts, fantasy pros, analysts, writers, TV personalities, podcast hosts with the followers and listeners that trust them. So every single team in our league is a pairing of a fantasy pro and an everyday player who donated to the charity of that pro's choice. And what we're going to be doing here on the podcast is really to spend a little time recapping everything that went on in the league. We'll talk a little bit about some of the goings on in the NFL and the fantasy landscape across the league. And then we're actually going to pull in every single week one of our teams. So this week we've got Shane Barrett of the Fantasy Collective and his running mate, Jeff Gustafson. So we're going to be hearing from them a little bit later on, but ultimately really, really excited to get this thing off the ground and can't wait to see how it grows from here.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm really proud to be a part of this. But let's get started. Week one is officially in the books. We had some winners, some losers, and we've got a bit of an outlook for the season. Everything's still pretty fresh, and so we're gonna kind of talk about the week one recap and talk about the weeks ahead and the matchups and go into a little bit of the waiver wire and what's to come in season 2021. So Eric, you want to talk a little bit about the recap from week one?
Yeah. So the way our league is structured, essentially it's 3 14-team conferences, and each of those conferences is playing with its own player pool that eventually merge into a single bracket in route to crowning an eventual champion. So
not complicated at all.
Exactly. Super straightforward. Don't even think I need to repeat this. So this year, our 3 conferences are the Pizza Conference, divided, of course, into New York and Chicago style. The Wings Conference, the divisions within are traditional and saucy nugs. And then the Nacho Conference, divvied up into Bel Grande and Libre. So looking across those 3 conferences, they actually each have their own texture. No shade to the other conferences, but Pizza came out really strong. That conference averaged about 132 points and was really evenly distributed across all of the teams, all of the 14 teams within. The Nacho Conference itself was a little bit more top heavy, some really, really big scores up top from teams like Jim Coventry, but some teams on the bottom just kind of laid an egg in week one. So a little bit wider of a range in that conference. And in Conference 3, the Wings Conference, is super well balanced. Nobody really blew it out of the park. Nobody had the bottom fall out. Just a really tight competitive conference. So really looking forward to see how these play out over the course of the season.
So Pizza, as we all know, wins. I love that the nachos are top heavy and that the chicken wings are fully sauced top to bottom. So everything that we expect from those leagues, I guess, huh?
Yeah, exactly. They're really living up to their namesake. So
yeah.
Shout out to our partners over at RT Sports. That's where we're hosting the league this year, and they were kind enough to lace us up with those conference names to start. and we just ran with it on the division names. And so far, they've really fit the bill. So it's always fun when a plan comes together, right?
Hey, yeah.
Yeah. So looking across, I guess kind of the more micro side of the league, there were some really incredible performances. Coming out of week one, our guy Jim Coventry of RotoWire, I mean, he just absolutely ran away with the victory.
Beast.
He defeated his opponent by better than 50 points. He put up the most points in the league. He actually finished the week with 161.5 points, and this was with Brandon Ayuk in his lineup, as well as in Mike Shanahan's doghouse, and netting him 0 points. So
Wow.
Coventry definitely came out with a strong performance in week one and has plenty of upside once he no longer has zeros in his lineup. So really, really strong performance in the first week of the league for Jim and his co-manager there.
All right. So who had the best overall performance, top to bottom?
Yeah, so combing through the league, unfortunately for her, Sam Holtz, one of my colleagues over at drroto.com, did get a little unlucky and ended up with an L in week one. But ultimately, her roster, top to bottom, is easily the deepest across this entire league. So within her starting lineup, she scored 134 points, very much so above average across all 42 of our teams. But she also had the most bench points across any of the teams in the league. She scored almost 70 points on her bench. So you think about the way that this league is formatted, the way that it's positionless. We start one quarterback and 7 flex spots that can be running back or receiver or tight end. I think Sam's really positioned herself well with that type of depth because she's going to have a lot of agency with her roster and how she ultimately deploys all those pieces. Just that in week one, she sort of ran into a buzzsaw. The Cap Crusaders, Casey Kasem and Mike are back together for year 2, and they're picking up right where they left off. So bit of a tough luck loss for Sam, but ultimately I think her roster's got her in a position to do really well throughout the year.
Yeah, I think depth is a lot more valuable long-term in a fantasy football league than a lot of people give credit to. So Sam, you'll get yours.
Yeah, for sure. Looking
All right,
through the remainder of what I would call the tough luck losses, there was an absolute slobber knocker of a matchup between Marcus Grant and Dave Kluge. The final score 152.85 to 149.55, so about a 3.5 point margin. And unfortunately, Dave Kluge ended up on the wrong side of this by just a hair. Despite losing in week one, he still walks out of this week as the 4th highest scoring team in the league. And really, this was a heavyweight fight. You look across both of their rosters. MG and Dave both had numerous players that were the top scoring at their position, wide receiver, quarterback, tight end, even. So I mean, it was really an offensive showing between those two. Unfortunately, Dave ended up on the wrong side of it, but I think there are better days to come for him for sure.
I think so, and I think we may see them battling head to head later on based on those scores. So, who else was interesting this week?
Yeah, another close one was between Team Hoff and Team Betts. Again, about a 6-point margin between those three, and really what ultimately decided it was the 5.3 points from Ezekiel Elliott. If Hoff were to have shuffled things around, he had the points on his bench with Devontae Parker, with Dallas Goedert, to ultimately make up the difference that would have won him the week. But I guess the question that I have for you, John, is, even considering the tough matchup against this Tampa Bay front that Ezekiel Elliott was facing, is there any way that you're pulling that trigger? You're pulling Zeke out of your lineup for a guy like Goddard or Parker?
No, 100% started for Ezekiel Elliott. he's got a prolific offense that they've got to open up their offense with the run. He's going to get the bulk of the carries for the Cowboys throughout the year as long as he stays healthy. No, I'm never going to sit Ezekiel. Because the one time you sit him, he's going to break loose for 40 points, and you're going to look like an idiot. So I don't know, but personally, I would never sit him. But that kind of leads us into the next thing I want to talk about. Speaking of injuries, had a few this week. The waiver wire typically after week one, it's not really pressing unless you just really messed up on your draft. There's not a lot of waivers going on, waiver claims, but we did have some injuries, some significant injuries. So let's talk about how the league responded with those waiver claims in week one. I'll let you go over some of the winners and were there any questionable waiver claims made this week?
Yeah, it's really interesting to watch it all play out because while there is no actual money on the line, the charity league itself, it still very much so plays like a high stakes league. And in these high stakes leagues, it's not uncommon for these pros to really plant their flag and go get their guy, right? So you mentioned injuries in week one. Arguably the two biggest, Raheem Mostert goes down early in that game against Detroit. What's old is new again. Raheem Mostert seems to be perpetually injured. He also seems to do it within about 5 snaps of the game starting. So you get a donut or 2 points in your lineup in this case.
And then IR.
Now that thrusts Eli Mitchell into the presumed starting role for that San Francisco offense that really features the run game heavily. He put up better than 100 yards in this first game, scored a touchdown. And while Kyle Shanahan does like to rotate through his running backs, he's also shown that once someone has established that hot hand, he tends to ride it. So, those are some of the reasons that have Eli Mitchell as just about everyone's top acquisition target. The second injury that really, really hurt in week one was Jerry Judy. He was out there looking really sharp early in that Denver game. Unfortunately, came up lame with a high ankle sprain. It sounds like he's going to be out for somewhere between 6 to 8 weeks. So ultimately, managers are having to make another plan, and predominantly that plan is Tim Patrick. He performed valiantly last year when Cortland Sutton was lost with injury. He very much so showed a nose for the end zone. He scored 6 touchdowns while he was playing in relief for an injured Sutton. So those were the two primary targets and where we saw a lot of the money flying as we processed waivers and ran fab last night. For Eli Mitchell specifically, I mean the big spenders were out. Stephania Bell spent $750, 75% of her $1,000 budget to acquire Eli Mitchell. I don't want to peek behind anyone's curtain, but Stephania, a known 49ers fan, so there might be a little hometown bias in her decision to spend up there. Following her up, got Dan Klaskins spending $556 of his fab dollars, coming in at $450. So significant chunks of everyone's free agent acquisition budget were spent to acquire the likes of Eli Mitchell. John, I don't know from your side, do you think that that's money well spent, or are you still a little hesitant about what Eli is going to bring to the table this year?
Honestly, I would love to pick Stephania's brain about that pick. I think you may be right. Drinking that hometown Kool-Aid may have lent some of that bidding in. And maybe there's a dark horse that was just driving the price up. I don't know. And maybe she knows more than we know. But that is a significant chunk to spend in week one for a great unknown. Again, it's week one. We're not having a whole lot of injuries yet. but you've just spent 75% of your allowance on a guy that may get you 25 points a game. He may get you 14. He may get you 7. So it's an interesting pick, to say the least. And I want success for that. I think at 75% of your allowance, that's a risky move. So I hope it works out for her. But me personally, I don't believe I would drop that amount of coin on week 1. So
yeah, I think really what went into this, a little bit of what I touched on earlier. In these high stakes leagues, these industry experts really do tend to plant their flag when they have made a strong evaluation for a player. They really do go all in, and Stefania did that quite literally with this bid. The second consideration is one that I sympathize with heavily, which is when it comes to your fab budget, your fab with 2 Bs, you are never going to get as much return on what you invest in those dollars as you will in week 1. You acquire a player in week 1, and you're going to have, in this case, 16 more weeks of production from that player, barring injury, right? Whereas you acquire a similar player in week 15, you've only got him for 2 more weeks, right? So ultimately, I tend to spend a little bit more early and really try to maximize my return on what I'm spending with those fab dollars. The second player, the second most expensive player to be acquired was the person we touched on a moment ago. That's Tim Patrick. So Jay came in at a cool $250, a quarter of his available budget. Shane Hollum got him at a relatively steep discount relative to Jay. Got him in across the line for $115.
That's a bargain.
Actually, in the pizza division, if anyone's listening, he's still a free agent. Go out and pick him up.
Yeah, and I mean, did you just start a bidding war in the pizza conference?
We'll see. We run waivers twice a week, Tuesday night, Friday night. So I wouldn't be surprised. Actually, the pizza conference, to the point earlier about how much scoring they did at this sort of prolific rate in week 1, I think they're all feeling pretty good with how their rosters are composed, because there wasn't a whole lot of waiver action. A few people, James Coe most notably, was pretty busy on the waiver wire, but not a whole lot of competing bids to contend with for him. So I think the pizza conference is feeling pretty good about how their rosters are laid out. Maybe we see some action when we run Fab again on Friday night.
All right. Well, we talked about the biggest bids for the week. Let's talk about some of the closest calls, or the closest call on the waiver wire.
Yeah, these always sting, right? Like the glory of victory when you see that you got a guy by $1 more than the second place bid. The other side, I feel bad. My guy John June missed out on Zach Pascal by a cool $3. Jeff Erickson. So with this being a 14-team league, essentially conferences, with how deep these starting lineups are, a guy like Pascal can very much so contribute week in and week out, especially if he continues scoring touchdowns at this rate. So to see a measly $3, right, on $1,000 budget be the difference, it's got to sting for John. I know that Jeff is feeling pretty good about squeaking that one through for with a really savvy bid.
All right. Well, okay. So let's talk about an interesting claim made this week.
Yeah. So I've got 2 reasons to highlight my guy Scott Engel, the king himself. One, true savvy veteran fashion. He was super busy, super active on waivers this week, but he was a budget shopper. He acquired J.J. Taylor. He acquired Ingram. He acquired Jared Goff, the New York Giants, and he spent a little less than 12% of his budget. So added a lot of players onto his roster, really continues to churn that bench, but has a sizable amount of that money left. And the interesting call is J.J. Taylor. he was actually the most expensive acquisition of all of the players that he targeted. Spent $77 on him, and it sort of makes me wonder, right? Like, we look at how well Sony Michel performed through the majority of that game against the Dolphins. Obviously, everyone saw what Ramondre Stevenson could do in the preseason. And so to
Mhm.
go out and spend nearly 10% of your budget on who might be the third or fourth string running back kind of makes me wonder if Scott might have his finger on the pulse of some inside information, or maybe he's just worried that that fumble at the end of the game is going to find he's going to find Damian Harrison. I think I actually said Sony Michel earlier. He's going to find Damian Harrison in Belichick's doghouse. So really, really interesting one to watch play out over the course of the year.
All right. Yeah. Some of these moves, it does sound like, they may know a lot more than the public knows. But let's talk about the steal of the day, or the week on Tuesday night.
Yeah, this one surprised me. It could be that the sort of positionless nature of how the rosters are constructed kind of eats away at some of the premium that this player carries. But Juwan Johnson, the tight end / wide receiver for the New Orleans Saints, he absolutely showed out in week one. He showed an immediate chemistry with now starter Jameis Winston. Ultimately, above and beyond the good day that he had in week one, he had 2 additional targets, one in the end zone that very much so could have been a touchdown. Another one was a little bubble screen just outside of the end zone that he could have ran in. So I think Juwan Johnson offers some really prolific scoring upside. And so I was surprised to pull back the Fab report and see that Dave Richard of CBS, our champion in year one, he scored Juwan Johnson for $25, 2.5% of budget.
That's Yeah, and
Um,
that's insane. Because I feel like this Juwan Johnson is easily a solid player in your flex role, um, and to drop 2.5% of your budget on a player like that, yeah, I would call that a steal.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. I'm I'm not sure what led to it. The only kind of logical thing that I could assign to this is that uh, the sort of positionless nature of the roster
Yeah,
really takes away that premium, right? In other leagues, in leagues where you're having to roster a tight end, getting access to wide receiver level productivity at the tight end spot is a significant edge, and that is something that is ultimately a bit moot with how we construct our lineups. But here in week one, I think more so, Dave just kind of stole on the rest of his conference.
yeah, yeah, agreed. Uh,
So
so
I guess kind of the last note that I have on this first waiver period is one of sorrow, and that's my good friend Cooter Doodle. She was our snub of the week.
oh no,
She was very much so active. She had beds in on multiple players, and specifically the 2 most coveted targets, Eli Mitchell, Tim Patrick. On $1,000 budget, she missed both of those players by a combined $10. So that's
ugh,
one where you wake up early on Wednesday, you're running through your Fab report, and you got to be kicking yourself thinking another dollar or two here or there, and you might have easily scored the 2 biggest acquisitions of the week. So
yeah,
shout out to my girl Cooter Doodle. Uh, Better days are on the
yeah,
horizon for you. Maybe up that bid a little bit next time.
yeah. And you've got enough going into week two. You've got, like what we were talking about. Uh, you've got 15 weeks, so you can maybe you hit it in week two with that same bid amount. But yeah, that's a tough one to wake up to. Um, but yeah, better days.
Completely. Well, like I said at the top of the show, every week we are going to be bringing on one of our teams, a pro and Joe pairing. So for this, our inaugural podcast, super excited to have Team Barrett, Shane Barrett, and Jeff Gustafson here joining us. Shane, Jeff, thanks for making a little time to jump in. How's it going tonight?
Good, man. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, absolutely. Jeff, you doing good tonight?
Jeff, can you hear us?
Eric keeps cutting out. I can't hear him.
Oh, okay. How you doing, Jeff?
I can hear John and Shane. Good.
Perfect.
Well, all right, Shane, I guess we'll get started with you. You're returning for your second year with the Pros with Joes, playing again for the Alzheimer's Association. What made you choose that cause? And tell us a little bit about how you came across Pros with Joes.
Yeah, so if you guys follow me on Twitter and know anything about me, Alzheimer's is very near and dear to my heart, my family's heart. My wife's grandmother passed away 2 years ago from the disease. And so shortly before that, I actually decided, because I was in Scott Fish's division in my first Scott Fish Bowl, to start my own charity tournament. And so I started Polly's Playoff, which is a tournament to end Alzheimer's. And then shortly after I started that, I think Eric reached out to me on Twitter and DM'd me and was like, "Hey, we're doing a charity tournament called Pros with Joes, where you have people bid to draft and manage the team with you, and goes to your fundraiser and whatnot, and then you manage the team all year with someone who's just a fan." And I was like, I absolutely loved the concept, so I was like, "Hell yeah, sign me up!" Like, sign me up yesterday. So then went through it, and Jeff was actually my Joe last year, and he's my Joe this year too. So I'm actually pretty pumped to be reunited. But yeah, so Alzheimer's has just affected my family personally, and Eric reached out to me, and it's another way to spread awareness for it. So that's why we're doing it, man.
Well, I appreciate that, Shane, because I lost my grandmother to Alzheimer's as well. They are always on my list of charities that I give to every year. So I always love to support anybody that's trying to raise money for AA, Alzheimer's Association.
Yeah.
Not to be confused, but I mean, they may need money too. But yeah, that's great. We're just glad that you're back for a second year. Jeff, we'll go to you. Tell me about your fantasy career and how you heard about Pros with Joes.
Well, I've been playing probably about 25 years in a home league.
Oh, wow.
Followed Shane on Twitter. Joined his Poly Playoffs last year, and then saw the Pro for Joes and signed that up last year and won. And then I did Poly Playoffs again this year, and then won again Pro with Joes again this year.
That's cool. And it's really cool that you guys are back, together, like bringing the band back together and everything. So you kind of have that dynamic of working together, and I think that's invaluable going into this season. That being said, let's talk about week one.
Do we have to?
It's public record at this point, Shane. So where does your team need help? Like, what happened? Where do you think the fall was? I mean, you had an opponent that was just basically unstoppable. But what were some of your pros and cons to week one, and where do you see going forward?
Yeah, and so Jeff set our lineup. So and I'm not. Hold on, that came out really wrong. Jeff set our lineup. Jeff set our lineup, but he said it how I would have said it and how we drafted it. So really, what we need is just for our studs outside of Darren Waller to step up and do what they're supposed to. So like Derrick Henry barely scored over 10 points. James Robinson only had 8 points. Screw you, Urban Meyer. Cortland Sutton only had 2 points. Russell Gage got a big fat 0. So really, It wasn't Jeff's fault at all. It was just really a bad week one.
Bad luck.
Yeah, and honestly, it matches the rest of my fantasy teams, so it's just fitting that this is how it happened.
Hey, note to self: we need to fade Shane in week one of any and all fantasy leagues.
For real though, my record in week one is horrid.
I'm right there with you. Honestly, while I was watching this game progress, Jim got out to a early lead with his players in Tampa Bay in that Tampa Bay Dallas game, and right when Jerry Judy went down with injury, it seemed to me like that was going to be the Cortland Sutton to the moon moment, and he really did come up flat. So I think this is just a bit of week one rust for your team. But secondarily, I mean, you guys ran into an absolute buzzsaw. Jim Coventry is the highest scoring team in the league. He was also rocking a donut with Brandon Ayuk in his roster, and he still outscored everybody by a good 8-10 points. So
the difference though is he had that one donut and then his 6-piece from his defense, which is probably pretty good for a defense. But then everybody was above 12 points.
Yeah,
far and away.
And that adds up.
Yeah.
So Jeff, this one's for you. Who's Team Barrett hoping to pick up the slack in week two? And where would you say outside of the big starters, where are you looking for the most help in week two?
Oh, I think our running backs definitely need to step up. Like I said, Derrick Henry, and I took Derrick Henry third in my home league, and I lost the first week too.
Yep, same.
Yep.
He was a big draft pick for me. Overspent, it seems like, after week one. But hopefully we'll get the value back in weeks 2 through 17. Jeez.
Yeah, that's weird, isn't it?
Yeah. It's all new again. So
one of the things that really jumped off the page with your roster construction is you two easily waited the longest on quarterback. You're sitting there with a pairing of Kirk Cousins and Sam Darnold. Was that intended to be more of a strategy advantage to build depth elsewhere? Are you bullish on those players and just thought they offered great value? Can you kind of walk us through your thinking on how the team came together at that position specifically?
Yeah, Jeff, I'll let you answer first, and then I'll. Oh, he was asking that because we waited the longest on quarterback. Was that intentional? And were we super bullish on those players, or was it more strategy and just kind of taking who was left to build depth elsewhere?
During the draft, I think Eric kept saying he could see everybody's cue, and he could see people get picked off, and I think that's what happened to us. Every time we had a quarterback that we wanted to get, it would get taken before, and so then we just rotate to running back or wide receiver. But I mean, Kirk Cousins performs. I mean,
I was going to say he's got weapons.
Yeah, if you miss all the top guys, I think Kirk Cousins is a good starter. If you're going to go wide receiver, running back.
Yeah, I was totally comfortable with it. But like you said, when we were going through the draft, we were like, "Oh yes, Dak's coming," and Dak's gone. And then it was like, Stafford. Okay, we got a shot at Stafford. And there he goes. Yep. And that happened to us probably 2 or 3 more times. But yeah, I'm happy with Cousins because he's typically an underrated fantasy quarterback. And then Darnold as a backup is someone who I'm super bullish on just because he's finally out of the Adam Gase curse.
Yeah.
And probably honestly has the best weapons that he's ever had.
How does he keep getting work?
Yeah, with CMC and DJ Moore and well, it's funny that you mentioned that, John. I think he's coaching high school, and it's like, bro, why? Like, how are you even coaching high school? You were that bad.
Yeah, his offensive coordinator friend is Dowell Loggins. I went to high school with him, and he was a backup quarterback for us in high school. And he may be coaching backup quarterbacks at this point now. Have to look into that, but yeah, I think Sam Darnold has some upside to him now that he's free of that offensive scheme, if you can call it that.
That's a generous word for
Yeah.
it.
Carrying forward, looking across the league, some of the happenings and news and notes of today. Arguably the biggest news to come out very early. Head coach Kevin Stefanski was kind enough to rule out Odell Beckham Jr. here on a Wednesday for us. So we have visibility into what to do and how we can account for that when setting our fantasy lineups this week. But I guess kind of looking at this Browns offense as a whole, Shane, what do you think the absence of OBJ means heading into this week 2 matchup?
Yeah, so you must have saved this question because I'm a Browns fan. But I from a long-term standpoint, I think it kind of sucks just because I'm ready to see what OBJ looks like in the offense now that Baker is more comfortable in the offense as well. But from a short-term perspective, to me, what this says is the stock is raising on players like David Njoku, maybe Harrison Bryant and Austin Hooper as well, and then definitely Anthony Schwartz. And I absolutely love that kid because I'm also an Auburn fan. But Baker also seemed to like Schwartz, and they've got a kind of clear-cut role for Schwartz. So I think this gives him more opportunity to prove that he was worth that 3rd-round draft pick. And that just, like, even when Odell comes back, that gives them another weapon. Like, again, I think long-term it affects the chemistry between Baker and OBJ and potentially the whole offense.
Yeah.
But because it gives them the ability to build those other players up, it could make them even more deadly long-term as well, because they don't have to necessarily rely on Odell, but they've got Odell, Jarvis, Chubb, Hunt, Landry, Anthony Schwartz, Harrison Bryant, David Njoku. Like, clearly I'm a fan. I could name the whole damn roster if I had to.
Hey, Jarvis Landry's he's on my roster on a couple of leagues, and I love Odell going down as a not Browns fan. So should get a lot more points from Jarvis in the weeks to come. So
do you
definitely
think that this was kind of the emergence of Schwartz? I know that Peoples-Jones got the start when OBJ was scratched. Do you think that remains the case for week 2, or do you think that based on the week 1 performance that we see him switch it up?
I could see him switch it up. Well, and that's another name too, like DPJ. Like, he didn't have a great fantasy performance, but he's still talented and he's an athletic freak. So, like, just another weapon that they've got. That he's young, needs to develop probably a little bit more still. But, like, yeah, I don't know. I could see they clearly, like, I don't know. It just felt like they clearly had a role cut out for Schwartz, and he performed in it. So I hope to continue to see that going forward, but then maybe depending on the game and game script, they open it up more and DPJ gets involved or Rashard Higgins gets involved as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they certainly shouldn't have really any difficulty in their matchup this week. So they sort of have a blank canvas to run out there and try whatever they like lining up against that team in week 2. So
yeah,
and
they looked good against Kansas City too.
Yeah, I mean, like most Browns thing ever to just completely come out and look like they have that game under control, only to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory, right?
Yeah, pretty much.
It's a hard life being a Browns fan. Every year it's filled with such anticipation, and then they become the Browns again, and it's like it's got to be a rough life.
It's hard knock life for us.
Speaking of hard knocks, Ertz did not practice today because his hamstring hurts. Are we dropping Zach Ertz, or are we holding on to him and hoping his age doesn't affect long term in the season?
I think I'm gonna hold, at least for this week. But if this continues to be a problem, Dallas Goedert's stock will hopefully find. Like, I think his stock and his actual value might actually finally match.
Meet. That's
Yeah,
always great, though.
yeah.
Yeah.
All right,
The
Eric,
thing
you gotta-
that was interesting to me, right, on Wednesday mornings as I'm going out there and picking up all of my $0 guys as everyone else is still asleep early in the morning. I saw Ertz dropped in a number of spots, and I'm with you, Shane. It felt a little premature to be dropping a guy that is part of an offense that so heavily features the tight end. So
Yeah.
I think it's going to be difficult to find your spots where it's going to be an Ertz week or a Goddard week. But that position is very much so prominent in the Philly offense. So I think it's going to be fits and starts for Ertz, but a little too soon to cut bait coming out of week one. Speaking of guys that at least I've seen some places being cut, Brandon Ayuk. We talked about him delivering the donut in week one for Jim Coventry. It felt like over the course of the entire offseason, everyone had either planted their flag in Team Debo or Team Ayuk. Obviously, Debo is up 1-0 in the initial results of that polling. But it's a super bizarre situation to watch unfold. Ayuk absolutely looked electric over the course of the 2020 season, and now he might be flirting with Shanahan's doghouse. I think the commentary that came out today was that if he wants to play, he's got to be a lot better than the guy behind him. So not exactly a ringing endorsement from the Shanahan coaching staff there. It obviously feels like it's way premature to cut bait on Brandon Ayuk, but I mean, what do you make of this whole situation? Do you think it's lingering injury? Do you think there's some off the field stuff that we might not be privy to? How do you square it?
Man, that's a really tough question. It almost feels like there might even be a little bit of ego, like thrown in of just butting heads between Ayuk and Shanahan. But man, like Ayuk was so good last year. But the thing was Debo and Kittle were in and out of the lineup. So it was like, was it kind of Devontae Parker-ish where they didn't have anybody else to throw to? Or is Ayuk actually that talented? And maybe he's just gotten complacent or even a little bit lazy because he didn't have to work as hard last year because he knew he was getting volume. Now it's like, okay, crap, these guys are back. What do I do? And I don't know. It's really not looking great. I'm not happy. I wasn't really in either camp. To be completely honest, I've got a couple shares here or there of both, but man, it's tough to watch, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, I'll throw out receipts even when I'm on the wrong side of it. I was firmly on Team Ayuk, and I think the reason why this was such a polarizing debate is in this run first scheme, everyone agrees. Maybe the only thing everyone can agree on, there's just not enough volume to support 3 pass catchers, right? Obviously, Kittle's got his role squared out, and that is his to be had. But the question is, who's the second pass receiver? Who's the second pass catcher, I should say?
Mm-hmm.
And whomever that is likely going to feast. And I'm not sure if there's much that can happen that will shift these trade wins in Ayuk's favor in the weeks to come.
Yeah, I don't know. Well, and that's an interesting point too. Like is Ayuk a trade candidate for the 49ers now? Like there are some wide receiver needy teams. Do they cut bait? And if they do, like think they drafted it. I think they drafted him in the first round, right? First or second
That's a great
last
question. He was
year.
early.
He was a very early round.
So like, do they keep him? Do they trade him? If they trade him, or what loss are they willing to take?
Yeah,
What do you get?
He was
Yeah.
25th overall, 25th
Okay.
overall selection in 2020. So they're heavily invested in him, but they've also shown a willingness to be really aggressive on the trade market.
Yeah.
So and because of that, they've got some holes in their future draft boards that they might want to make up. So it's a fair point. I would tend to think that if we're going to see that, we would see Ayuk's usage ramp up a bit, right? Because I mean, basically,
Mhm.
Kyle Shanahan
Get him out there.
is just dragging
Yeah.
his asset through the mud. So
Yeah.
kind of boost him a bit before they get him out on the market. But not something I considered before, but certainly on the range of outcomes.
Yeah, and I think any unhappy wide receiver in the locker room is something that you gotta get out of the locker room or resolve that situation. They're very
ASAP.
much like thoroughbreds, and so you have an unhappy wide receiver, you have an unhappy offense, and that's something that first round pick, but is he bringing your team down in the course of this? So I think if they are going to trot him out, they've got to give him some points available, getting some passes. So looking ahead to Thursday night, anybody from either of the teams that you guys are looking at to have some big performances? I mean, it's a primetime game. It's not Monday night, but it's the new Monday night. Who's the big performers?
Thursday night matchup, right?
Yeah.
The Giants and the football team.
Yeah.
Jeff, what do you
Barnford.
think of that one?
Well, I got McLaurin and Logan Thomas. So I hope they do good.
Honestly, I think that's probably it.
Yeah,
From
and I
guys
wonder
that
how
I want in this game.
Yeah, and how much they use Barkley.
That guy, Saquon he burned me last year, and I'm just waiting. I was talking earlier, and I'm just waiting for Saquon's leg to fall off this year.
Yeah.
The offensive line for the Giants is abysmal, and so I mean, it's like I don't understand everybody drafting Saquon so high this year because of that. It'll be interesting, and maybe I'm wrong. Maybe he has a breakout season like 2 seasons ago, but it's hard to come back from that kind of ACL injury, and I don't see based on week 1 performances, I don't see the spark that he had 2 years ago. So I'm not really gonna carve out time tomorrow night to watch this game, but we'll see what performances we see.
Yeah,
I
know, kind of sitting in that seat, heavily invested in this Washington passing game. I would wonder how you're feeling about the emergence of Taylor Heineke, right? Ryan Fitzpatrick has a hip injury that nobody can pronounce, and I don't think we're going to see much
subluxation.
There you go.
There, yeah. Nailed it.
Check out the big brains on Brad. So I mean, I don't know if I'm feeling that good if I'm that heavily invested in the football team's pass catchers. Jeff, Shane, I don't know if you have any opposing thoughts to that.
No, yeah, like I think basically from a passing game standpoint, you want Terry. You maybe want Logan Thomas. I'm not a big Thomas guy, but he's obviously I think the second option there, and then everybody else to me seems kind of like a downgrade now that Fitzmagic is out. So it will be interesting to see what Heineke's learned over the offseason and over the past year of when he got his first start last year to now, and see what steps he can make to being and not even him being a viable fantasy option, but like making other people viable fantasy options.
Yeah.
So
I think
that's a huge concern.
I think maybe the biggest silver lining out of all of this is the impact on Antonio Gibson. I'm very much so in Antonio Gibson stan. I've got him in a number of places. And
why are we friends?
Yeah.
Why are we friends? You like Joe Mixon and Antonio Gibson? What the hell?
It makes for good debate. So my whole argument over the
yin
course
and
of the
yang
summer for Antonio Gibson was if he can get even half of the passing workload out of that backfield, he's a steal in the early second round. And with Heineke in there, he out-targeted J.D. McKissic 5-1. So if that's a trend that continues, in addition to his 20 rushing attempts, if he's going to get 4 or 5 targets a week, I think that he very much so is going to be flirting with that running back one week in and week out. But that offense has to be able to at least advance the ball down the field for him to convert on his upside and score the ball a bit.
Yep.
I don't know, man. I've never been sold on Gibson. It did I think you were in the group chat. I can't remember, but did a Twitter debate with what is his name? Rob Addict FF or something like that from Going for Two, and we debated Gibson, and I was on the non-Gibson side, just because they're like, and I saw a stat today where he only had 4 games where he had over 70 yards last year. And 2 of those were probably Dallas. And now obviously he still gets Dallas, and they lost Tank Lawrence today. So their run defense is going to be horrid, but I think overall they'll be improved. And I don't know, man. I don't see it. Not yet, at least.
Yeah, time will tell. There's room for you on the Gibson bandwagon whenever you decide to convert.
We'll see.
Yeah. All right, Eric, we got some listener questions. I know. Did you want to go touch on a couple of those, or?
Yeah. We had a few come in. John, if you want to toss those up and kind of discuss.
Okay. Yeah. So we've got. Mike was asking, can you start Saquon Barkley this Thursday with any confidence? My other options are Mike Davis, Tyson Williams, or Jamal Williams.
I think he actually tweeted this to me too.
Oh,
yeah.
Well, now's the time to answer it, Shane.
It's Mike Davis, Tyson Williams, and Jamal Williams are his other options.
Mike Davis, Tyson Williams, and Jamal Williams. Yes.
Man, that's tough. If you had better options, I would sit Saquon, to be honest.
Yep.
Because that Washington defense is nasty. The only reason I'm considering keeping him in the lineup is because your other options are not great. I think Tyson gets you the volume potentially. And Jamal could be sneaky as a flex play, but I don't you don't want that as your RB1 or RB2. Because that if he falls flat, doesn't have a good game, then you're in trouble.
Yeah. So we'll do one more question. Sal asked, we've got CEH rostered. Who's he talking about? CEH. I'm sorry.
Clyde Edwards-Helaire.
He's
there we go.
Edwards-Helaire owner.
Okay. He's got Eli Mitchell on waivers wants to know if he should drop either Darrell Williams or Rojo to add James White, Mark Ingram, or Kenny Gainwell.
Yeah, so it sounds like Sal was able to get one through and secured Mitchell on
Yep.
waivers. Now he's looking at White, Ingram, or Gainwell, and I think he's sweating who to drop based on Rojo in this doghouse or his handcuff in Darrell Williams. So early in the season, it sounds like it's probably a shorter bench format. How do you feel about letting your handcuff go, or Rojo for that matter, for either of those options?
Jeff, you got any thoughts on that? On Rojo or Darrell Williams for Gainwell, Ingram, or who was the other one?
James White.
James White. Jeff, you there?
Jeff.
Yeah. Hey. I'm a Joe, remember?
Well, I will say I picked up Kenny Gainwell today, so
Yeah.
I
No,
like Kenny
and-
Gainwell in Philly.
So Eric, to answer your question, I am a huge handcuff guy. But I'm gonna throw a caveat here into this one. The Chiefs played the Browns last week, obviously. Browns have one of the best defensive lines in the league. And so they were not able to, like, CEH didn't have a great game from a fantasy perspective. But I also believe he was one of 2 or 3 players that had 90% or more snap share. So with that in mind, I might be okay cutting Darrell Williams for, I think, man, I would probably go James White. I don't know if I'm ready to fully invest and fully trust in this Philly offense. And then Ingram, somebody tweeted out today, I can't remember who it was, has a absolute murderer's row for the next 4 weeks when it comes to defenses. So I don't necessarily see Houston being in a run-heavy game script. So I basically want James White here, and I'd be willing to drop Williams for him, I think, in a short bench situation.
Yeah, we got to chat a little bit about Ingram and the idea of adding him on the nightcap a few nights ago. So shout out me and Shane running it back, and that was exactly it, right? Like, this is probably the only instance where the Texans are ever going to have a double-digit lead over the course of the
until
season.
they play Jacksonville again, right?
Yeah. So circle that date on your calendar. But apart from that, you're absolutely picking him up at his highest value, and I think you're going to get diminishing returns week in and week out. So I tend to agree. I think James White is really the only one that you can be confident in how he's going to be utilized in that offense of the three. There were just kind of fluky or circumstantial things that were ultimately informing what we saw out of Mark Ingram and out of Kenny Gainwell in week 1.
Yeah.
All right, I think that wraps up all the questions we had this week. Jeff, first to you. Thanks for joining us. Anybody or anything you want to shout out while we got you on the show?
No. I live in a small Iowa town. I'm like the only guy that gets on Twitter and follows you. Everybody else is the big. They still do the Yahoo Fantasy Pro thing, so it helps me out a lot watching you, listen to you guys. Trust me.
Awesome.
Well, we're glad to have you again. Wish you both the best of luck. Shane, you want to let everybody know where they can find you on the interwebs and Twitters?
Yeah, sure. You guys can find me on Twitter at FFShaneB. Make sure you like and subscribe to our YouTube page, which is Fantasy Football Collective. You can follow us on Twitter at FF_collective. That's KOLLECTIV. And then I'm the co-host of the Fantasy Nightcap. We'll be bringing you waiver wires we record every Monday night, releases every Tuesday. So hopefully get you some advantage over that the rest of your league for waiver pickups. So week one's probably our most important episode. Feel like we did a good job, especially because Eric specifically outbid me in one league by a freaking dollar. So yeah, I think we did a good job. So make sure you check that out and listen to that too.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, absolutely. Jeff Shane, thanks for jumping on board with us for our inaugural episode. We're going to be doing this every single week. You can look for the Pros with Joe's podcast to drop Thursday mornings. We are super excited to be part of the Dr. Roto podcast network. So anywhere that you get podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, the like, go ahead and search for Pros with Joe's podcast, or you can just go directly to the Dr. Roto podcast network and get all of the amazing content that Dr. Roto and team are pushing out. And while you're there, go ahead and press on that little subscribe button, throw a rating in there. It really, really helps us reach more people as we're trying to spread the word about the work that we're doing. And we'll be back again for week 2. Thanks, everyone.
All right. See y'all next week.
Thanks for stopping by the office. Get your fantasy prescription by subscribing to the channel and checking out drroto.com. And until the next visit, be well and take care.